Hello and welcome back to DivideTheWord.blog. Today we're going to talk about recognizing a spiritually abusive church or system. Now that can be a little bit of a negative topic, so we're going to keep it short and light, but I do feel like it's an important topic because it's something that if we can recognize, we can avoid. And if we can avoid, we can make sure to be growing the true church of God, the one that is loving and non-judgmental. So I want to talk to you about the 10 top ways to know if you're in or somebody you love is in a spiritually abusive church. And this can tie a little bit in with what we would call a cult. But that word gets thrown around way too much in the Christian world. Not everything's a cult just because you disagree with it. But some things can definitely be abusive. So I have a question that you should ask yourself, or have somebody who's in what you believe to be a spiritually abusive church. This question. If I was to leave this church right now, would that cause problems with family, friends, work, my social status? Would I be considered the backslider, the outcast, shunned? Would I be considered to be in Satan's snare? If the answer is yes, then you're probably in a spiritually abusive church. And dealing with something like this is something you should do prayerfully, carefully, and do as much reading and counseling and talking and praying as you can. I want to give you 2 books that really helped me in this journey. 15 years ago, I entered into an apostolic Pentecostal church. And it was an independent church. It was off of the United Pentecostal Church International system. And I think there's some really good things that have come through the Pentecostal movement, which was a follow-through or an offshoot of the John Wesleyan holiness movement back in the very early 1900s. But unfortunately, they went too far into legalism. And the 2 books that really helped me, and I'm going to put links to these books in the description of the video. The first one is called The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse. And this one has the 10 list that we're going to go over today about how to recognize a spiritually abusive church. But it also gives you a lot of great information on how to heal and recover and change your way of thinking and your heart, your spirit, your mentality after you get out of a judgmental and abusive church. And let me tell you, by 15 years of experience, when you're in that type of a church, you end up with glasses of judgmentalism. And I'll give you an example. In the church I was in, they had a very high priority on dress, right? So that we use the scripture, without holiness, no man shall see the Lord. And then they went on to define holiness as this long list of things you can and cannot do, most importantly about your dress. You couldn't wear short sleeve shirts or shorts. You weren't to wear makeup as a female. Men or women weren't to have any kind of jewelry. Wedding rings weren't allowed. And the reason our church split off of the United Pentecostal Church is because the United Pentecostal Church started allowing wedding rings and some television. And so we went independent. Should have been a red flag. So far as to say you can't wear a metal tie clip or metal clips for your hair. Men aren't allowed to have facial hair. It just got really deep into legalism. And so what you need to recover from that is some really good information so that you stop judging other people who don't look just like you. It got so bad that if somebody claimed to be a Christian, but they wore short sleeve shirts or had makeup on, or a guy had a beard, mustache, whatever, we would call those sincerely wrong Christians and unsaved Christians. It gets that bad, and that's why you need help. So again, The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse is a great book to help you through the process of healing. Secondly is another book called Toxic Faith. And this, it really illustrates what I just mentioned of how your faith turns from this love and reverence for the fact that Jesus Christ died for you. And then that would give you in turn a desire to serve him. Toxic faith is one in which somebody says that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, God hates you and God's going to judge you and God's going to curse you. And so faith is no longer faith, it's obligation. And then you look at other people and put that same pressure on them. And it's really unfortunate. So I'm going to put links to these books in the notes of the video. And a couple illustrations. When I left my church March of 2017, the Sunday I decided to stop visiting that church, a good friend of mine in the church, still in the church, had invited me and my wife out to dinner that day after church. And I texted him back, "Brother, I would love to. That sounds really good. Let me check with my wife, make sure we have time and the schedule is open, and let's do it. Let's connect. Let's have lunch. But I wanted to let him know because I knew how people feel about leaving that church. You are shunned. You are backslidden. You are under Satan's snare. You are to be avoided. You are to be disfellowshipped. Don't rub shoulders with somebody not in the church or you'll get tainted too. So I let him know, brother, just so you know, I've decided to no longer attend this particular church. And his response was, well, that's too bad. And then lunch was canceled. You see, that's a spiritually abusive church, one in which your loyalty to one another and friendships and family is all based on going to that building, and it's all based on whether or not you do everything the pastor of that church says. So here are the top 10 ways to recognize a spiritually abusive church. Number one is there's always one man at the top or woman. It's a monarchical reign. They have set up a little mini kingdom that it is literally that person who decides everything from the color of the carpet, who sings in the choir, what songs can be sung on what days. And then it goes so far as to what kind of hairstyles you can have. If your hair, in my church, you couldn't have sideburns past the middle of your ear. No facial hair, no shorts, no short sleeve shirts, no metal tie clips. They sold little plastic ones in the church bookstore to make sure nobody's wearing metal tie pins, tie clips. You couldn't have metal cuff rings. I mean, it just went really, really far and too far. And so that is number one, when you have a monarchical leader at the very top of the church. Number two is isolationist and engulfment. This is a church that says, we're the only ones saved. We're the only one with the revelation of truth. In fact, that word should almost be a red flag, and that's really disappointing because Jesus Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But now when you hear church say, we're the only ones with truth, that's a red flag. That is the second sign of a spiritually abusive church, because what they're going to cause you to behave like is that anybody who is different from you at all is lost. You become the judge of the quick and the dead for God due to that isolationist, us versus them mentality of a spiritually abusive church. It's disgusting. That's not the way God meant church to be, and yet that's what's happening today. Number three, busyness. Busyness. Keep them so busy they can't get in trouble. Keep the young people involved in so many programs, and so many nights of their week is taken up doing, and by themselves, none of this is wrong. Prayer meetings and outreach and studies and youth Bible studies and on it goes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is when you do get to the point where you're too obligated. In my church, the most common phrase I heard was, you don't tell them no. Them being the leaders. If you're asked to do something, you don't say no. Because saying no has repercussions. If you say no to this thing, they will disqualify you from all other possible ways of serving God. Furthermore, if you ask to be used in a particular way, you basically disqualify yourself from other areas of ministry. So they have to ask you. You don't go to them. That's froward or forward. And if you say no, that's rebellion. You can't do that. So number four is independent. If a church says I'm independent, that's a big giant red flag. It basically means there's nobody over the leader keeping accountability in place. And furthermore, you'll find in a church like this that if you ask the leadership, what are you doing with my tithes and offerings? Where's that money going? How much are we giving to missionaries? How much are we giving to a benevolence fund? How much is going to feeding poor people? What? What do you mean? We don't have a ministry to feed poor people? I thought that was part of Christ's commandments. So where is my money going? You don't do that because that is considered rebellion. So independence means there's no accountability over the leadership of the church, and anything goes according to what they dictate. Number five is stalking. In other words, they keep tabs on you. And it gets so bad that the people in the church become cannibalistic. In other words, if I see, or when I was in the church, if I saw a couple of young people kissing, I had to tell on. I had to make sure, I told the pastor, so the pastor could call the kids in, call the parents in, have a talk. They keep track of your attendance to church, your giving, when you show up for Bible study. By experience, we put cameras in so that we could see when people showed up late. I mean, it's just abusive. It's abusive, and so then that leads to you have to ask the pastor permission to go on vacation, and so you say, Pastor, I would love to take my family out for a week to Disneyland. Brother, I'm sorry, but you've been missing church, and I noticed you showed up twice late for outreach, and I think you really shouldn't be going on vacation until you get all this in order. That's a spiritually abusive church. Number 6 is coded language. Such things as when you come in to the truth. Those are red flags. The truth is universal. The Lord said, all have access to this. But in a coded language or an abusive church, you'll have events where they're preaching and then they'll tell the sound man, turn off the recording. And then they'll go on to say something that they didn't want recorded. That's coded language. That should be a real big indicator you're an abusive church. Number 7 is unrealistic promises. And usually this is always focused on finances. If you just give as much as you can, then God's going to bless you with that car and that raise and that job and all the fruits of the physical world that you couldn't have without God's blessing. And unfortunately, that's just not true, and it creates a lot of agony within Christians because they give and give and give to the point where they're broke and it's hurting and it's creating stress in the home and their bills are late, but they gave to the church and God didn't bless them back. So am I not good enough for God to bless? Did I not give enough? What is wrong with me? So unrealistic promises. God didn't promise physical wealth for faithfulness. He did promise He would give us blessings, but it wasn't always a promise of wealth. Okay, number 8 is courting rituals. In my church, this was absolutely 100% true. You had to have permission from the pastor who you could date, if you could date at all. Right? There was a period where I don't think you're ready to be dating. So no. Okay, well, we wait and wait and wait. Pastor, now can I date? Yeah, who are you thinking about? Oh, I really had my eyes on this girl. No, she's not the one for you. Pick somebody else. And then when you do finally get to date, they kind of dictate, okay, we don't want people dating longer than this because if you date longer than this, there's more opportunity for you to get a little squirrely and maybe commit sin, fornication. So they control your dating period. And then when you think, oh, Pastor, I've dated, I'm in love, I want to marry this girl. Yeah, well, we've been watching you and we're just not sure that's the right one for you. So I think it'd be better if you'd cut it off. And don't forget, I said you don't tell them no. So if they say cut it off, you cut it off. So courting rituals, that's a great sign of abusive church. If the pastor controls who you date, how long you date, who you can propose to, how long your engagement can be, what the wedding invitations can say, what the format of the church wedding can be, you're in an abusive spiritually abusive church. Okay, number 9 is shunning. Remember the story I told you when I left my church. A good friend and brother wanted to go out to lunch, and as soon as I let him know I wasn't in the church any longer, cut off. There is only 2 people in that church of 150 folks who still talk to me. That's not Christ-like. And it's not like I've sued the church or I've done something horrible to the church. I just started to disagree with this way of controlling people. So I said, for me, I'm just stepping out of that. I still pray. I still love God. I still have my degree in theology. I still study the Bible. We started DivideTheWord.blog to spread God's ministry. I didn't stop being a lover of God. I stopped being a lover of legislating people. But that meant I had to be shunned. I was cast out. The bishop of the church pulled up to a parking lot where I was the other day, and I waved and said hi, and he completely ignored me and talked to the person standing next to me. That's just not Christ-like. Number 10, and the last one, is the ends justify the means. We can put cameras up to watch people because that means we're being a watcher over their soul. I'm their overseer. So that helps me to catch when their spirit is having problems, when they're weak in the faith. That's a tool to control people. I have computer systems to track how much you've been giving. If you start drying up on your giving, you get called in. Track when you show up to church, and if you stop showing up to church 3-4 services a week, if you miss any one of those, you get called in. So that it's stalking and tracking people, but it's justified because we're looking out for your soul and your well-being. And there's always that validation to a spiritually abusive church. And so these are 10 signs that you can watch out for in a spiritually abusive church or any church to see if it's spiritually abusive, and then use that to help yourself avoid something that could really start to dig down in your soul and truly cause a weakness of faith. Because if you start to believe in these 10 things and you allow that to get into your faith and your Christian belief, then by nature you must subjugate other people to live under that same doctrine or idea or dogma. And then, as I think the Bible describes, we create twofold children of hell. And that is so dangerous, which is why somebody can write a book called Toxic Faith, when faith can be toxic, which is poisonous to the kingdom of God, the body of Christ. So I hope these help you. There's lots of other videos about this topic, so I'd love to answer questions. Please leave your questions, comments in the video. Just ask you one thing. Be respectful. Be respectful of me, of yourself, and of any other people who leave comments. Even if you disagree, feel free to disagree, but do it in a Christ-like manner where we keep each other's respect at a high level. So God bless you. Thank you for visiting dividetheword.blog, and check out the notes to the video for links to the books, to our blog, and other posts that may be applicable to this video. Thank you.